many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi and welcome to Adopt Perspective. I'm your host, Jo Sparrow. Today's guest is an adopted person and photographer from Newcastle in New South Wales. Kathryn Blake was born and adopted in Bathurst in 1970 as the eldest of two adopted girls. She has since gone on to connect with her brother, who was placed for adoption, and more recently, who is also, I should say, placed for adoption, and more recently her father. Her reunion stories are filled with incredible near misses and moments of serendipity. Kathryn has experienced many of the joys and heartbreaks that come along with reunions that we can all relate to, and she's still exploring whether a no always remains a no. Welcome to Adopt Perspective, Kath, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jo. It's an absolute honour and privilege to be here.
Kath, could I begin by asking you to share a little with us about what it was like for you to grow up adopted?
Yeah, sure. Look, I suppose like most adopted kids, it feels normal and weird or all at the same time, and a definite disconnect, I suppose. So I was adopted into a very loving Christian household. It was church every Sunday without fail. I'm the eldest of two adopted girls. I always knew that I was adopted. It was never a secret, and I don't actually remember ever being told. It's kind of like my first conscious thought was even knowing that I was adopted. However, it wasn't something that was then ever really discussed. It was like, well, the truth's out there, and that's that. I had an auntie who was adopted as well, and my mum was born in the 1920s, and she was given to her maternal grandparents to raise while her natural mother lived in the house, but never a word was spoken. So my mother, I think, had a lot of sense of not belonging, and so our adoption was always open and happy to talk about, but there was also a lot of, sweeping things under the carpet and not discussing. My parents were quite elderly. They were 45, and they actually lied about their age to me. They took 10 years off their age, and it wasn't until I was searching for adoption papers one day that I came across their original birth certificates.
Oh, wow.
and found that they'd lied. And so I think, like, my sister was tall with red hair and freckles. I had blonde hair and blue eyes. So there was like a constant reminder of the adoption, and people saying, oh, you two don't look like sisters. And then you kind of wait for your parents, reaction to see how, to see how they react. And so I suppose I always felt like a bit of an alien. And, you have all those feelings of when people, family around you go, oh, your grandparents or your auntie or your this, and in your head, you're like, well, they're not my grandparent. They're not my auntie. Like, I don't belong here. This is not, it's my reality, but it's not, where I belong. So I think the best way of describing growing up being adopted was, I heard someone say once, it was like being in a really nice hotel where you're cared for, you're looked after, you've got a really nice room, you get to use all the facilities, but it's just not home, I suppose, is my feelings. Yeah, I felt like a bit of an alien, not belonging. Yeah.
That's an incredible analogy. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, so that's that's the only way I can explain it.
I'm just out of curiosity, did you ever ask your parents why they lied about their age?
No, I never did, but I always knew that it was, I suppose growing up in the 70s, all my friends' parents, they were all having babies in their 20s. And so it was very clear that my parents were the age of grandparents. And I can even remember going into a dentist when we were little, and the receptionist is like, "Oh, you're here with grandma?" And I'm like, "No, that's my mum." And so I never asked, but I kind of always knew that I think it was, they were trying to be kind in that, when you're having conversations with your friends and it's like, "Well, how old are your mum and dad?" That they'd knocked, they'd knocked 10 years off for us.
So what led to you searching your first search for your identifying information?
Well, I suppose like all adopted kids, you just want to know where you come from. And you just want to have, you want to know your story, like, what was the circumstances, your heritage, like, growing up, I had people tell me that, I looked Italian or I looked English or I looked, and you just, I suppose, really just want to know, like, where you come from. And I can remember I couldn't wait until I was 18 to actually start that search. And I know over the years, over my life, like, you obsess about it and then you leave it for a while and then you obsess about it. But at 18, I was definitely obsessed with, finding out, where I come from. And I suppose in a little way, as a child, you almost think that you're going to be greeted with open arms and that circumstances will have changed. And so while you understand, I think, some of the complexities, I think you really go into it kind of thinking, "Oh, this will be a good thing." Like, but yeah, just wanting to know where I come from was and I think it's actually really, it's almost like a primitive, like an instinct that you will do it. Like, it's something that's like deep down in your core that drives you to wanting to know where you come from. And the only way is by reaching out to your birth parents. Yeah.
What you're saying really resonates with my own experience. Just always searching. And as soon as the opportunity was there, I was like a bull at a gate. I was,
Yeah, and they say that adoptees are like, we're really good detectives, aren't we? Because we've been searching, like, since the day we were born, really. You're always scanning crowds. Does that person look like me? Or could that be a possibility? Or, so you've just got this drive, I suppose, to know.
Yeah. So what was the result of your search and what information were you able to discover?
Yeah, well, not much. At first, so I was 18 in 1988, so that's when I started my search. So my first reaching out was to Family and Community Services and also to Bathurst Base Hospital, where I was born. The letter that I received back from the hospital, they were not at liberty to give me, too much information. But they did give me my birthday, which I already knew, that my weight and the time that I was born, that it was a very normal birth, that my natural mother was 18 and unmarried when she had me, and there was absolutely no information regarding my father, which, 30 years on, we know is a lie. It took Family and Community Services a lot longer to get back to me. I think they were like between 6 to 12 months. And again, stating that they would put me on the reunion register, but there was only a very small amount of information. My mother's Christian name was classified as so unusual that they would actually only give me her middle name. And that she called me Terry at birth, And I was described as an extremely attractive and healthy child, which kind of was a little boost for the ego in amongst all the we can't give you any information.
Well, and it's interesting because social workers of the day often wrote really terrible things on
Yeah.
things that are quite shocking when people get their freedom of information, terrible judgmental comments.
Yeah, and I did receive that. Now, I'm not exactly sure where this excerpt came in, but it might have been when I got my prescribed information years later. But there was an excerpt from the hospital, and the note was that the matron had said that I was receiving far too much petting and attention, and this baby needs to be adopted out as soon as possible. So it's nice to know that back in the 70s, giving a newborn baby attention was, apparently a negative negative thing. And again, there was they said that there was absolutely no information regarding my father. And they gave me the dates of, I was adopted out in July 1970, and that the adoptive order for my parents was, okayed in 71. And then, of course, you receive like all the pamphlets from, the adoption triangle, which basically in those days was all the information that, help, I suppose, that you got, how to write a letter to your birth mother. And so I really had nothing. And then in 2000, I think it was, the legislation changed. And that's when I was able to apply for a supply authority to get the okay to get my prescribed information. And that was like mind-blowing, getting that prescribed information, because it, for the first time I had my mother's full name. It had your social and medical history. So there was like little blurbs about like my grandparents, and under birth father, it had his Christian name, but then they'd liquid papered out his surname and his address. And it was just like I suppose, another stab to the heart. And you're just like, seriously, there's people at Family and Community Services that know more about my life than me. So, that was the first, that was all that I got in those first few years of searching. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a punch in the gut, isn't it, when you see those liquid papered things out? I remember kind of interpreting it as, I always had like this image of the people keeping my information away from me as like, being these dark gray suited people in a big building, and I'd get really angry about it. I'd be so angry. I'm like, how do you get to keep that information from me? Like, I would make me wildly angry when I was younger.
Oh, absolutely. And I can remember thinking, maybe I could get a job at Family and Community Services, and then, I could get a job in the adoption section, and then, I could search, and, and then you go, oh no, you get busted, and then you'd end up in jail and all that kind of stuff.
Like jail.
Yeah. But yeah, it definitely, I suppose I can't even begin to explain my anger at the system. Like, the adoption has never really made me angry. It was always more, you understood that there were circumstances, and, but then the way the government and the system in the years later treats you is like, that's where a lot of my angst and anger regarding the whole adoption comes from, is just, it's like you're not a person and you don't have feelings, and it's sad.
Get it. So you had your mother's name. Can you walk us through what happened when you made some steps to reunite with her?
Yeah, so I accidentally found my mother, and I wasn't actively searching. We'd been on holidays up in Mudgee, and 2 kids, caravan, whole catastrophe, and we decided, I'd said to my husband, I'd really like to go to Bathurst and just walk around some graveyards, just see if I can find, something, a grandparent or, just go for a little look. Anyway, so we did that, and I did. I've actually found one of my grandparents' graves, and it was getting quite late in the evening, and my best friend actually comes from Bathurst, and we just didn't feel like driving all the way home to Newcastle. So I called my best friend and I was like, oh, do you know any motels that are in town that we can get the caravan and the bikes and, everything off the street? And she gave me the name of a couple. Anyway, so we turned up at this hotel, and I walked into reception and to book in, and the gentleman behind the counter was like, so what are you doing in Bathurst? And I said, oh, just a little bit of family research. And he said, oh, you'd have to be and, said my mother's surname, birth mother's surname. And I was like, yeah. And he said, oh, you'd have to be related to, and then said my birth mother's name. And I can remember like just sinking to the floor. It was like somebody had literally blown me over with a leaf, and I was happy, but I was in disbelief, and I was like being recognized for the first time I was in my mid-30s. And it was just like overwhelming. I can remember my daughter walked into the reception, and he was just like, oh my God, she looks exactly like, my other half siblings. Anyway, it turns out that the gentleman behind the counter had actually gone to school with my natural mother. His kids and her kids were in the same sporting teams. And I just had a big, case of verbal diarrhea. Out it all came. Like, I told him that I was adopted and that she called me Terry at birth, and all the information. Anyway, he said, I'll give her a call and let her know that you're here. Now, looking back 20 years later, that was probably the completely like wrong thing to do. But at the time, I was like so excited. I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So we went to our rooms, and then a couple of hours later, I received a call from her husband. And it was a very short and sweet phone call. And it was, thanks, but no thanks. We know who you are. There's to be no contact. And in those days, I was very apologetic for even, thinking of reaching out. I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm not here to upset anyone. My father was dying of cancer at the time. And I was like, my parents aren't going to be around forever. I just want to, know where I came from. And he made a passing comment of, oh, I know how that feels. So I actually thought that he was losing a parent to cancer, but as it turned out, he was actually passing. And so it was a very short and sweet thanks, but no thanks. So I came home from Bathurst with a really, really heavy heart and just totally deflated. But sorry, getting back to like after the phone call, the next morning, we went down to reception to check out. And the gentleman behind the counter was like, so how did you go? I was like, well, not too good. Well, he felt really sorry for me. He gave me the names of all my siblings. He gave me the name and address of my grandmother. He gave me a distant cousin or something that used to do family research. Like, he just gave me all this information, but he knew nothing of my birth father, like didn't know anything about him whatsoever. But he said, you should go to the grandmother's house. He said, you never know, like she might be open. Anyway, so you can imagine Bathurst on a Sunday morning. The streets are as wide as a football field. Everyone's at church, no cars around. So I pull up at this house, I walk down the path, and I get to the veranda, and there's a table, and there's a sign above the table that says, Meals on Wheels, please knock and then leave meal on table provided. And I was kind of like, who doesn't let Meals on Wheels into their house? Like, anyway, so knock. And I could hear shuffling, but no one was coming to that door. So I turned around, and then as I was walking back to the car, there was this woman sitting in a car right behind ours, and it was like looking in a mirror. and this woman was kind of just like looking straight through me. And I can remember going, my brain's kind of going, you've been searching for, for 48 hours now, you're seeing things like, and so I went straight to our car, sat down, didn't say a word. My husband turned to me straight away and said, have you seen that woman sitting in the car behind us? That's you in 20 years' time. And no sooner had he said that than that car took off at 100 miles an hour. And that was that. So came back home, and so I decided to write another letter. And because I don't know, I just couldn't accept no contact. I was just like, and one, it was the husband who had called me, not her. So I was thinking maybe there's a slight chance that that she wants contact. So I wrote a letter and said that, I'd left with a heavy heart and that I'm not here to upset anyone. I put in, a few questions, like, if you don't want to have contact, can you just answer these questions? Like, who's my father? What were the circumstances? I may have put a sneaky wedding photo and a couple of photos of the kids in there as well, and sent it off. Anyway, about a week later, I get another call from her husband, and this call was absolutely horrid. He was basically yelling and screaming down the phone at me, telling me to go away, and that how dare I send her a letter, and you said that you didn't want to upset anyone. And I can just remember sitting on the hall floor just bawling my eyes out, just copping all this abuse. And so I think after that phone call, I basically just shut down. Like it really knocked me for six. And but at the same time, I was still like, but I still haven't heard from her. It's still all you. But, I had two young kids, and so I think now you'd probably call it a frozen trauma response. That was it. And I'd reconciled that I would never reach out to her again. I did have the 4 siblings' names. And so I kind of, over those years, reconciled that if I did ever make contact again, I would probably reach out to one of the siblings and not her. So that's where I left it. Yeah.
Did you have much support around you at that time, Kath?
Yeah, I did. So my husband is like an absolute rock. We've been married 28 years, and I'm sure over those 28 years, some days he looks at me and just goes, why are you doing this to yourself? But he is an absolute rock. I also had found a brother, and so I'd only met him 12 months before. And so I had him, I had my sister. I don't ever remember telling my adopted parents about that story. But I had support, but at the same time, I think I didn't talk about it much. I think that I just kind of shut down and was like, okay, that's that, and just left it. Yeah.
Just on that, so did you tell your adoptive parents that you were looking to reunite with your mother, or?
At that stage, no, but because I'd found my brother 12 months before that, like, they knew that I was looking because I was on the register and what have you. But it's funny, I actually don't remember actually ever sitting with my parents and saying I am actively searching for my parents. No, but yeah. So, but I think because I'd found my brother, they knew.
Yeah.
They knew. So, yeah.
Well, let's get to that. How did you come to meet your brother?
So it was 2003. So this is the year before, the whole Bathurst incident. I'd moved houses several times, and I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind that reunion register that you were on. And I was like, oh, I should really contact them and, update my details because it's been years, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I did. I updated my details. Within a couple of weeks of me doing that, I received a letter from the Benevolent Society to say that there'd been a match on the reunion register and that I had a brother, and please reach out to us so that we can give you all his contact details. So the next morning, straight on the phone to the Benevolent Society, they gave me his full name, his address, his home number, his mobile number. So I rang him. So yes, straight away the next morning. And I can remember that phone call because I was, he answered the phone and I was like, oh, hi, does the name Kathryn Blake mean anything to you? And he was like, no. And I said, how about Big Sister? And we both just screamed and was like, ah, how are you? And then that day, was pretty phenomenal because it was in the days of dial-up internet. So
oh gosh,
email, you had to wait for the
young people will never know the
right. So we're trying to email each other photos, and his girlfriend, who's now his wife, she was so excited. She was emailing me photos, and I can remember the first photo that came up, and I looked at him and I was like, I now know about the, Princess Leia effect, but I looked at him and I went, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I didn't meet you in a pub, because we only grew up 2 hours away from each other, because I thought, you're a good looking boy. So we hit it off, and he's been part of my life for the last 21 years. And, he and his wife even got married on our 10th wedding anniversary. We got to go to his wedding, he's had 2 kids. And so we've been, without living in each other's pockets, we've been a part of each other's lives. And, he moved overseas about 10 years ago. So since he's moved overseas, of course, we don't get to see each other as often. But one of the things that really blows me away with him is that they'll come back and they won't catch up with all their friends, but I'm always the top of the list to catch up with. And I can't begin to explain how having him in my life is just such a beautiful thing. And when we found each other, of course, the first thing that we did was have you got your prescribed information? Yep, let's go in and let's compare notes. And same birth mother, the name of the birth father was the same. All our medical and social history was the same. So we came to the conclusion that we were a full sibling as well. So, which I think for adopted children is very, very rare to find a sibling that's same birth parents. So so finding him's just been it's been wonderful.
Oh, you give me the emotional roller coaster today, Kat.
I know, right? Yeah. So, and when I reached out to my natural mother, back in Bathurst that day, I rang him straight away and said, "You're never going to believe I've just walked into this motel and these guys recognized me." And he'd reached out to our natural mother several years before, and he'd had the same response with the husband calling, and it was he didn't even get to talk to him. They spoke to his adopted parents, and he can remember being in the background, and it was a very short, thank you, there will be no contact. So I was very excited. I was like, ah, and he was trying to ground me and, trying to go, Kath, just brace yourself. This may not be a good thing. And he was right. So,
happy to have each other.
Yes, absolutely.
So when you first reached out to me, you were in the throes of searching for and hopefully connecting with your father. Have you had any success, and what can you share about this with us?
Yeah. So, spoiler alert, yes, they did find him, and it's been wonderful. But the story getting there It's been, again, quite a story. In 2016, the government changed the legislation again as to they were then releasing fathers, or putative fathers' names, as they call them. So I applied, but in New South Wales, apparently it's the only state in Australia that does this to adoptees, but I had to sign an undertaking to say that they would release his name, but I wasn't to contact him or his family or his friends unless I used authorised adoption agency. My brother had moved overseas, and he was only supposed to go for 12 months, right? And I kind of always, in the back of my mind, thought that if we search for our birth parents again, we would do it together. So I told my brother, our name and our father's name. And I kind of thought, oh, well, I'll wait till you come back and we'll do it. Anyway, next year he'd be like, oh, we're signing up for another 12 months. We're signing up for another 12 months. We're signing up for another 12 months. Anyway, so it got to the point where he came back this year and he was like, oh, we bought a house overseas. And I'm just like, you're never coming home. And so that kind of started, it got that little switch flicked again that, if I'm going to search, then it'll probably be by myself. And, sorry, I can't wait any longer for you for him to come home. And so in the meantime, that auntie that was adopted, she'd been at me to join Ancestry to get my DNA done. And I don't know, that test sat in that drawer for 18 months. Anyway, I finally got it done and I sat there. And funny thing is, first match that came up was actually my half sister from my natural mother's side. So she came up as a match.
Matches. Mine are really super low.
Yeah. So and then it gives you, half sibling, and so she came up, and then I had some distant cousins on my natural father's side pop up. So but because I had this stupid undertaking, I didn't feel like I could reach out. I was basically just sitting there, waiting for someone to contact me. And one Saturday night, I'm sitting at home and I get this Ancestry notification, and it's from a second cousin on my natural father's side. She was in her 50s, had just found out that her natural father, she just found out her natural father's name after 50 odd years. She wasn't adopted. So her story is another long story, but she'd reached out wanting to know, trying to find her natural father. And I thought, geez, out of all the people you could have reached out to, you've reached out to the one that knows nothing and is sitting back like you wanting to know. Anyway, we chatted, and the good thing about her circumstance was that she wasn't actually legally adopted. So she's not bound by any of the adoption legislation. So she was able to get on Reconnect Facebook groups and, ask for her, her father's name. Does anybody know? Anyway, all these little funeral notices started to pop up. And she added me to this group. I wasn't saying anything. I was just sitting back, just watching it all unfold. And then from these little funeral notices, started to create a tree on Ancestry. And then she'd been in contact with someone else, and they'd said to her, look, I think your great-grandparents are going to be this couple. So I put their names in, and then I had the names from the funeral notices, and then, Ancestry does its thing. All the little leaves start to come up, and she's on the phone to me, and she's like, how are you going? How are you going? And I'm like, look, you're just going to have to give me 48 hours because I'm going to have to check death notices and, trying to work it all out. Anyway, at the end of the 48 hours, I had found her father and I had found my father. They were cousins. Unfortunately, her father had passed. But what that did was it actually made me really angry again, because I was like, here I am bound by all this legislation that I can't reach out, I can't ask questions unless I use an authorized adoption agency. Yet she could kind of scream it all to the world and was getting all these answers, and then was reconnecting with like her half brother. And I'm sitting there just going, oh, stuff it. Like, if I'm going to do it, I just have to reach out to Park and go down the right channels and just get it done. So that's what I did. And so I was getting counseling, and they actually found 3 people with my father's name. So they're like, we're sending out 3 letters. And then one day I'm sitting at home and I get a phone call from Park, and they said, he's received the letter, he's called us, he wants contact, give him a call. And so that was so overwhelming and so beautiful. And he is just so open and willing to answer any question. Like, he was in tears, I was in tears. He was like, and I thought today was just going to be another mundane Monday. And look, I found my daughter. And he had no idea whether I was a boy or a girl. The story was that when they found out that they were pregnant, basically my natural mother's mother basically stepped in and said, this is what's happening. They came to his house, and he said, I remember it was a Sunday because we're having a roast, to say that the baby's going to be given up for adoption. My natural mother was then shipped off to her sister's place, I think, on the coast. And he didn't hear whether I was born. He didn't know. He basically didn't know anything. And then I said to him, well, I come as a pigeon pair. I said, I found like my brother 20 years ago, you know, you're the other child. And he was like, there was silence. And he's like, no. He's like, there's just you. I don't know of any second pregnancy. And I'm like, oh, are you sure? Like, you know, all of our information's the same. And I didn't want to hassle him about it because I just found him. But at the same time, my mind was just like, no, this is not right. Like, no, our information's all the same. Anyway, over the next 10 days, this poor man, like, we spoke every day, and we still do. And I was like, are you sure you didn't hook up again with my natural mother? And he has been adamant. He's just like, no, the relationship was over. There's no way that he can be mine. And that just, I was heartbroken. I just couldn't believe that was how my brother's story and I was going to end. Not end, but that it was kind of like a fork in the road now, that like I was going to go this way and he was going to go that way. And then he's going to have to start from scratch again. Like, all the information that we've got about our natural father for my brother is wrong. Like, this can't be right. And so I seriously interrogated this man for 10 days. Like, every day I was like, are you sure? Because I said, I now have to tell my brother that this is not going to be like his ending. Anyway, my natural father's like, no. He's like, there's no way it can be him. Anyway, so because my brother's overseas, you know, you're emailing. I didn't want to put it in an email. And he's like, oh, Kath, we're about to go on holidays for a couple of weeks. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to ruin your holiday. So I was just like, look, we've found him. There's good news and there's bad news. Just give me a call when you can. So I kind of kept it very generic. Anyway, so he called me and I told him what our natural father had said. And that was just heartbreaking, because I could just hear, like, he was trying to be happy for me, but at the same time, like, I could just feel like, anyway, we were like, look, he may not remember, like, maybe he just get your DNA done And then that nobody can tell us any different. Like, you know, maybe the paperwork's wrong, maybe it's right. Anyway, so he got his DNA done. But while we're waiting for the DNA, my birth father and I had arranged to meet. So we travelled up to Tamworth to see him. And that was just like, we met in the main street. I'm sure he was like behind the bushes, you know, just sussing me out for the first 5 minutes. And, you know, I'm looking at every man that's walking past me, like, is that him? And then my husband's next to me tormenting me, of course, like every guy that walked past, you know, you go, that's him, that's him. And then he kind of came up from behind and I turned around, and as soon as I saw him, I just knew he had this big smile on his face. And so we'd actually hired like a little cabin on the river in a caravan park. So he came over and he didn't leave till like 10:30 that night. You know, it was really weird. And we both acknowledged how weird it was to finally meet. And there was lots of long silences and, you know, but I can remember my husband at one point said to him, oh, if you want to go home, just let us know, like, you know, we'll drop you off or whatever. And he's like, no, I want to stay. I want to get to know this girl. And so it was awesome, but just very weird because you're basically strangers and you know, and then he felt guilty. Like he was also having feels of guilt about the adoption. And so there's just so much going on, isn't there? And anyway, the next day he came over and he brought some photo albums with him. And we're going through these photo albums and he's like pointing to certain photos, and they were photos of him and my natural mother when they were teenagers. And I can't even begin to express like the emotion that overcame me, like for the first time in my life, actually seeing photos of my natural parents together. But then there was this one photo from his 21st, and I started to do the math, and I'm like, I would have been 9 months old when that photo was taken. So then I started to go, well, hang on, my brother's 2 years younger than me. This photo was taken when I was 9 months old. This is not such a stretch that maybe, like, you know, I think you could be. Anyway, over the next couple of days, the more time we spent with each other, I was looking at him and I was going, you talk like my brother. You look like my brother. I was sending my brother's wife the photos because she was asking, how's everything going? And I was sending her the photos, but I didn't want to send her too many because I was like, if the DNA comes back and we're not a match, like I don't want to be getting his hopes up. So I was just kind of trapped in this, like, I don't know, seesaw of wanting it to be true, but, you know, trying to believe that maybe it wasn't. And so that was all very, very weird. And anyway, we came home, and then a few weeks later gets his DNA. And so it's 5 o'clock in Australia, but it was like 1 o'clock in the morning over there. And they're like, Kath, we've just got it. We don't know what it means. Can you sort it out? Now, anyone that's gotten a DNA result before,
it's a bit mind-blowing, isn't it? It's like the accounting of the DNA world, which just makes my mind go off kilter.
Absolutely. It's like, 2,000 and something percentiles, and like, what does that mean? And so anyway, I got on again, Facebook is awesome. There's these DNA detectives out there. And I said, look, I've just got, this match back, and these are our percentages, like, help. So they sent me the DNA painter. And even then our result came back with could be half brother, could be full sibling. And I'm just like, universe, like, seriously, like, anyway. But then DNA, ancestry.com does its magic over the next few hours. And before we knew it, it had come up as full sibling. talking to people on the group, they were saying, like, Kath, how do the percentages read? Because if you're a half sibling, it will come up with like a solid, say, 28%. But if you're a full sibling, it'll give you a range, like it'll be 40 to 50% and all that. And we had the range and we had the, and then it came up with you are 99% full siblings. So then I had another phone call I had to make. So I rang my natural father and I was like, are you sitting down? And he's like, yeah. And I said, have you got a stiff drink? And he's like, why? And I said, well, you know how I said I came as a pigeon pair? Congratulations, it's a boy. Like he's yours. And again, there was silence. Like it was silence at first and then tears and then so happy and overwhelmed and but no recollection of the pregnancy at all. So we don't know if our natural mother, and he's been very honest and said the relationship, like after me, was kind of, well, first of all, he said that it had finished. Then it moved to, obviously it was off and on. So we're like, well, maybe it was the end of the relationship. Maybe they'd split up. She found herself pregnant again with all the trauma that goes on. Maybe she didn't tell a soul. Like Glenn was born in Sydney. I was born in Bathurst. Maybe she just didn't tell anyone, including our natural father. So that's where we're at.
I'm just finding myself feeling really emotional listening to the story, just how complex and just what we've got to deal with in adoption. Just up and downs and the secrets and the trauma. It's just a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot. And I really feel, and like I said, my natural father and I, we call each other every day. And I'm just checking in on him because I think I've been living with this for 50 odd years. Like for me, like it's the roller coaster ride, but it's my life. But for these people, I think it's, something that the baby's given up and then you get on with your life and you never think about it again. And then they reappear. And then not only do they reappear, but they bring someone else with them. And I can't even imagine what that does to him and how he's feeling. And then even so the photos that he gave me of my natural parents, I've framed them and I've put them on my hall table. And I was telling him this one day, and this was after he'd found out that, we came as a pigeon pair. And he's like, well, you can cut her out of the photos, and I thought you can't judge because I don't even he must be feeling anger now towards, there was a second child that he knew nothing about. And spin that chicken wheel again and see where it lands.
And I think it's a fallacy too about, a child is placed for adoption and the parents don't think about them again. From my experience in talking with mothers and fathers who have lost children to adoption, they think about them every day.
Yeah. And he did say, it was funny, we had a very frank conversation when we first met and when he was having those feelings of guilt. And I'm like, please don't feel guilty in this. I had a wonderful upbringing and, parents who loved me and, there's a reason why we found each other now and, not before. I've completely lost my track. What were we saying?
Don't feel any guilt, you're saying? You was
there was something that
not thinking of.
Not thinking of. And when he said, when we were talking about the adoption and the decision was made, he said, for me, he said, you were just a baby. You weren't an adult, you were just a baby. And I think, for a teenage boy, you were just a baby. You weren't an adult. It's almost like you weren't a person. It's like, so that even that disconnect from him about it's just a baby that we're giving away. It's not a fully grown person. And then this fully
preservation tactic, wouldn't it? Like
yeah,
survive something like that, I would think.
yeah, absolutely. And then this fully grown person, look here, I've prepared one for you earlier, turns up in your life. Yeah. So yeah, the trauma, yeah, on all levels, isn't it? Like when does it stop?
So I think you probably already answered this, but I will ask, what have the connections with your father and your brother brought to your life?
Yeah, I'm currently reading The Primal Wound, which is, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing because it's pretty heavy reading, but there was a saying in that really resonated with me, and it was like adopted or adoptees are like Swiss cheese. We're full of holes. And finding my brother filled some of those holes. And I can remember when we found each other, we'd say, like, if in all of this we only end up with each other, like, that's okay because we've found each other. And to have a full sibling that, if like that understands how you feel as a child, and that some of the frank conversations that we have, and getting to know him and having him as part of my life is just, I'm so grateful, and it's just the biggest blessing. So finding my brother filled some of my Swiss cheese holes, and then finding my father has filled more Swiss cheese holes. And he has brought so much peace to my life. It's really, really hard to explain, and just a healing to my heart, and just knowing where I came from. And those moments where in my paperwork, it's got that my grandfather was a rabbit inspector. And it's something that my brother and I have always laughed about, because we're like, what the hell is a rabbit inspector? Like, do they count rabbits? Do they pick up a rabbit and go, that's a rabbit? No, that's a cow. Like, we had no idea what this rabbit inspector was. Anyway, finding my natural father and him telling me what a rabbit inspector was, that works for pastoral care. And, they basically bait rabbits and killed them. That's what he did. But when I was looking through the photo album, here's this a newspaper clipping of my grandfather, and it had the rabbit inspector in the title. And I just started bawling my eyes out, because I was just like, there's my rabbit inspector. Like, so it's funny, those connections, and what connections are going to make you emotional. So anyway, my natural father and I, the funny thing about that is that now when we text each other, we put little rabbit ears after our comments, because that's something that has just kind of like brought us really close together, is this silly rabbit, we laugh, the rabbit inspector. So so my father's just brought so much peace and healing, and my brother's just wonderful. So I'm so blessed, like, through all the trauma that adoption brings, you really have to focus on the blessings and the positives. Like, my natural mother could have put father unknown on our paperwork. And so, my brother and I could be in a situation where we don't even know whether we're the same, for those 20 years before DNA and all that kind of stuff. So I really try and concentrate on the blessings and being grateful for what I do have. And so, I'm just so blessed to have the both of them in my life now. Yeah.
I'm happy for you. So it's been 20 years since you first reached out to your mother, and I know that you are considering reaching out again. Could you share with us some of what you were taking into consideration and why you were considering another contact?
Yeah. So when I reached out to Park to find my natural father, I I'd had a conversation with my brother's wife actually, and there's something about women in their 50s, right? We get to the point where we're just like, you know what? We're done. We are done of being the secret. We are done of it being swept under the carpet. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm sick of being a secret. And remember, I'd sent my sister-in-law this message, and I'm like, right, I'm going to find my father, and I'm going to reach out to one of my natural mother's children. I'd kind of come to the decision that I was never going to reach out to my natural mother again because of the trauma. But I'd always thought, if I do it, I'm going to reach out to one of the kids. And so when I contacted Park, I said, okay, I'm at this point where I'd like to find my natural father, but I'd also, can you help me reach out to one of my half siblings? And they were like, yep, sure, no worries, not a problem. Anyway, they started the process for my father first. And so that was happening. And then a discussion, they called me one day to discuss reaching out for my half sibling. And they were like, look, we're happy to do it. And the choice is yours. But we've always found that if the natural mother is alive, that it is, we recommend that you reach out to your natural mother. And I didn't take that phone call very well. I was like, to be brutally honest, I was in this place where I was like, Park, you're supposed to understand where I'm coming from. And I took it as like, you're telling me that I shouldn't reach out to my sister and I should reach out to my mother, and which wasn't the case. They were just, trying to give me options. And anyway, this conversation I was having with the counsellor, I was just like, look, I don't even know how I feel about this, because I was like, I was never going to reach out to this woman again, but I can see what you're saying, and I can appreciate what you're saying. So I just went, you know what? I'm just going to put that on the shelf for now and just think about it. Then within a week or so of that happening, they found my father. So I was kind of like, you know what? I just want to enjoy getting to know, my father, and I'm not going to worry about that. But when I started talking to my father about, the stories of how they met and, because their relationship went for 5 years, like they were high school sweethearts. And so, he'd tell me about how they met, in a cafe over on a blind date with the, toasted cheese sandwiches and things. And a funny thing started to happen. I started to soften towards her, and my feelings of hurt and anger were just softening. And then having those photos of the two of them together, I was just looking at her in a much kinder light, and like looking at these two teenagers and going, wow, like you were just babies. And so I started to soften. And then having, the counsellors have said, maybe you should reach out to your natural mother first and what have you. And then like lots of counselling that I'm going through at the moment with them. And so I've changed my mind, and I was like, yeah, I think you guys are right. Like, I think that I should reach out to my natural mother again first. 20 years has passed. Her husband has passed away. Her children are now also a lot older. She may be in a better place. And I think me not reaching out to her, that it actually coming from Park, it's not going to be a generic letter by any means to say, there's some random family member. It is going to be an acknowledgement of how I found her 20 years ago was, not the right way to go about things. And I don't hold a lot of hope. And I don't know whether that's just me trying to protect myself from another rejection. I also can't feel the relationship being as close as the one that I have with my natural father for some reason. But I hope, even if it's a telephone call, like even if it's just answering some questions about the circumstances of my brother's birth and situation, that I'd be happy with that. But yeah, I just look at her with a much kinder light. And even if she doesn't want to have contact, if she takes up the opportunity to get counselling with Park, or to be able to maybe for the first time in 50 odd years talk to someone about what happened and her feelings. And I wish that for her too. And I hope that for her too, that because then that might lead to, maybe not now, but in the future, maybe she will soften. Like if she's not ready now, maybe she will be in the future. And so, yeah, so I've done a complete 360 on, and that podcast of yours, like when I went on this, search of, finding my father again and what have you, I was listening to your podcast every day. I'd be editing and I'd have all these stories. And the one that really stood out was the lady that went to England. And I think it was even titled "No Doesn't Mean a No." And how she turned, yeah, she turned up on a doorstep. And, so I said to my counselors the other day, as an adopted person, it's really easy to get hung up on the why me and the abandonment and the rejection and all the negativity and the trauma that comes with it. But that just spirals you into a really dark place. And so this year, I can't tell you how many self-help books I've read this year on finding the joy and finding the happiness in your life, because I was really preparing myself for another rejection with my father as well. So I started yoga. I was like, I just want to be in this place of love and light so that, whatever happens, I'm going to be in the best, mental state to be able to, accept it and take it on. And so I'm kind of using that now to look at my natural mother and go, you know what, like we're not getting any younger. No hard feelings, right? Let's just, let's reach out again and see where it takes me. So yeah, fingers crossed, but at the same time, what will be will be. So yeah, that's where I'm at with her.
Yeah. And, there's so many things that you said that resonated for me too. Like at one point, I remember trying to stuff those holes that you talk about with people, with information, with connections, with all those things. And I still kept feeling there's still this hollow. What's going on? And then I started to realize it's not so much, nothing can fill that back up again, but there's other things you can be doing at the same time to heal. And it wasn't so much filling them, it was healing them.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's really hard sometimes to say yes to things. And when I started getting counseling with Park, like there were these support groups that you could join. And, again, you're like, oh, do I want to? And I joined this support group and we catch up via Zoom, once a month, and we discuss books that we're reading and, all about adoption. And that has been so good for me as well, just being able to share my story and hear other people's stories. And it really is healing those holes, because you don't know what the outcome's going to be. It can be another no. And so you do have to do, I think, everything that you can to get yourself in a place where it's not going to make you spiral. And yes, of course, it's fine to have all those feelings, but you can't unpack and live there because it's just not good for you. You need to get on with your life. So
it's not like there's a full stop and you move on. Like it's adoption's ongoing stuff. So, it'll come ebb and flow in your life and recede and come forward, and information and support can really change everything. And I'm so glad that you're in touch with, for anyone who doesn't know, Park is Post-Adoption Resource Centre, which is the funded organisation in New South Wales to assist people. And they do great work. And sometimes we don't hear what we want to hear straight away, when we're getting good support, but it can help to shift our perspective over time if we're willing to not be in a rush and absorb and do some work. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that not being in a rush is the key, because when these feelings of finding your natural family come, it's almost like they always come with this sense of urgency. Like it sits dormant for a long, long time, and then the switch flicks and you go, okay, I'm on the hunt again. And you're just you need answers now and you need to do it now. But yeah, taking that step back and just not rushing. And I suppose that counselling is just, it is invaluable, and they do such good work at Park. I will be forever grateful to those ladies for holding my hand on this journey.
That's fantastic. Look, Kat, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I've absolutely loved hearing about your story and your perspective. And I know that hearing your story will help others, just as you hearing Lisa's and other stories has helped you. So thank you so much for joining us.
You are more than welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, if you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And just note that Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you are calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.